What is a home? Is it just a building made of wood and brick, or is it the heart of a family, the place where love grows and memories are born? For me, Margaret Thompson, my little Victorian house in Salem, Oregon had been more than just four walls, it had been my entire life. But sometimes pain comes from where we least expect it. Sometimes it's the people we love most who inflict the deepest wounds. And sometimes we must find strength in our darkest moments that we never knew we possessed. This is my story, the story of a 78-year-old widow who had to learn that true strength doesn't come from being loved, but from loving yourself, even when the whole world seems to be against you. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. November in Salem was cold and gray. The century-old oak trees that lined Maple Street held onto their last golden leaves, but in my heart, winter had already arrived and seemed endless. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd prepared breakfast for my beloved Robert for 52 years, staring at the letter in my trembling hands. Dear Mom, my daughter Jessica had written, Michael and I have been thinking a lot about your situation. We believe it would be best for everyone if you sold the house and moved into a senior living community. You'll be well cared for there, and we won't have to worry anymore. I read those lines for the 5th time, as if repetition could somehow change their meaning. Sell the house. The house where Jessica had taken her first steps. The house where Robert had brought me roses from our own garden every anniversary. The house where I knew every creak, every floorboard, every shadow like my own soul. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 3 in the afternoon. Robert had bought it at an estate sale 30 years ago. So you never forget how precious time is, my love, he'd said then. Now each chime felt like a dagger in my heart. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Through the small window, I could see Jessica's black SUV parked in front of the house. My daughter had come, but this time she wasn't alone. Michael, my son-in-law, stood beside her with that impenetrable expression I'd never been able to read. Hi, Mom, Jessica said when I opened the door. Her voice sounded tired, almost pained. We need to talk. I led them into the living room, where photos of 3 generations smiled down from the walls. Jessica as a baby in Robert's arms. Jessica's wedding to Michael 15 years ago. The grandchildren during their last Christmas visit. A whole life captured in pictures. Mom, Jessica began, sitting stiffly on the couch that had belonged to my grandmother, you got my letter. Yes, I got it. My voice was barely above a whisper. Michael cleared his throat. Margaret, you have to understand, this is a sensible decision. You're getting lonelier here, and if something happens. If something happens, my neighbors are here, I interrupted him. The Johnsons next door check on me every day. Mrs. Peterson from the pharmacy calls me every evening. That's not the same as professional care, Michael replied with his businesslike manner. And honestly, Margaret, this old house is way too big for you. It's not practical. Not practical. The word echoed in my head. Was love practical? Were memories practical? Was an entire lifetime practical? I understand your concern, I said slowly, but this is my home. This is where I belong. Jessica stood up abruptly, her patience clearly at an end. Mom, you don't understand. This isn't a request. The air in the room suddenly felt thicker. I felt something cold spreading in my stomach. What do you mean? Michael took over again, his voice now harder, more businesslike. We've looked at your will, Margaret. After your death, the house would go to Jessica anyway. Why not act now, while you're still of sound mind? Michael. Jessica's voice was sharp, but he ignored her. Besides, he continued, we've already spoken with a realtor. The house value has increased significantly in recent years. You could live very comfortably in one of the new senior communities. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. You've already spoken with a realtor. Without asking me. We just wanted to be informed, Jessica mumbled, unable to look me in the eyes. Jessica, my voice trembled with emotion, this is my home. This is our home. This is where you spoke your first words. Where we celebrated Christmas, birthdays, Easter. Where Dad died, in my arms, in our bed. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be, Jessica whispered. Harder than it has to be. I stood up, my small frame suddenly filled with a dignity that seemed to fill the room. You want to take my life away from me, and I should make it easy for you. Michael sighed impatiently. Margaret, be reasonable. You're 78 years old, alone in a house that's much too big. What if you fall? What if you get sick? We can't constantly drive here to check on you. I never asked you to. But the responsibility still lies with us, Michael said with a coldness that cut me to the bone. Jessica stood up again, her hands clenched into fists. Mom, you don't understand. Michael got a job offer in Seattle. A very good one. We're moving. To Seattle. I sat down slowly. Yes. And we can't leave you here alone when we're so far away. But I don't want you to worry about me. I'm doing fine. Michael's patience was finally at an end. That's not enough, Margaret. We need a solution. A final solution. The way he said it made me shudder. It sounded less like concern and more like business. What if I say no? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael and Jessica exchanged a look that I didn't miss. Mom, Jessica said finally, her voice breaking, please don't force us to take drastic measures. What kind of drastic measures? Michael leaned forward. If you won't go voluntarily, we might have to find other ways. For your own good. The words hung in the air like poison. I understood the threat completely. They were talking about declaring me incompetent, claiming I was no longer of sound mind. This moment would be forever burned into my memory, my own daughter, the child I had born, nursed, loved, and raised, threatening to remove me from my own home. I need time to think, I whispered. You have 1 week, Michael said, standing up. Then we expect an answer. After they left, I remained alone in the silence of my house. The photos on the walls seemed to accuse me, the memories cast shadows darker than the November twilight. For the first time since Robert's death 2 years earlier, I cried, not from sadness, but from a despair so deep it threatened to tear my soul apart. That night was endless. I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with Robert for 52 years, staring at the ceiling I'd stared at through 1,000 sleepless nights. But this time everything felt different. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Grace Johnson, my 75-year-old neighbor who'd lived next door for 40 years. Margaret, dear, I saw Jessica's car yesterday. How are you doing? I hesitated. Should I tell Grace the truth? Should I admit that my own daughter wanted to drive me from my home? It's complicated, Grace. Would you like to come over for coffee? I made fresh apple pie. An hour later, I sat in Grace's cozy kitchen and told her everything. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, the demand to sell the house, the threats, the coldness in Michael's eyes, the desperation in Jessica's voice. Grace listened in silence, her old hands wrapped around her coffee cup. When I finished, there was a long silence. My God, Margaret, Grace whispered finally. That's cruel. Maybe they're right, I murmured. Maybe I really am too old, too much of a burden. Nonsense. Grace's voice was sharp. You're of sound mind, you're managing well, and the house is your property. Nobody has the right to tell you where you should live. But if they move to Seattle, then they move. That's their decision. But they can't expect you to turn your whole life upside down just because they're changing their plans. Grace reached across the table and took my hands. Listen, dear. I've known you for 40 years. You're one of the strongest women I know. You survived 2 miscarriages before Jessica came. You nursed Robert through his cancer. You've fought your whole life. Fight now too. But she's my daughter. That's exactly why she should treat you better. That afternoon, the phone rang again. This time it was Jessica. Mom, how are you? How do you think I am, Jessica? Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. Michael was too harsh. For the first time since yesterday's visit, I felt a glimmer of hope. Jessica, we can talk about this. There has to be another way. Mom, I'm calling because I have to tell you something. Michael spoke with a lawyer today. The glimmer of hope died abruptly. With a lawyer? It's about your mental capacity, Mom. Michael thinks that you might need help with important decisions. I felt like I was falling deeper and deeper into a dark abyss. Jessica, I'm completely sound of mind. You know that. Mom, you live alone in a house that's much too big. You sometimes talk to Dad as if he's still there. Yesterday you forgot to turn off the stove. I talked to his photo, Jessica. And I didn't forget the stove, I just forgot to clean the burner. That's a huge difference. Mom, please don't yell at me. I'm not yelling. But I realized my voice had actually gotten louder. Jessica, please. I'm your mother. How can you do this to me? The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. Mom, Jessica said finally, her voice barely audible, Michael says if you don't go voluntarily, we'll be forced to. He says we have to protect you from yourself. Protect me from myself. Jessica, do you hear yourself? Mom, Michael is right. You're not getting any younger. What if something happens? What if you fall and nobody finds you? What if I'm happy? I interrupted her. What if I want to live exactly where I've lived for the last 52 years? Doesn't that count for anything? Mom, you don't understand. Michael. Always Michael. What about you, Jessica? What do you think? Not Michael, you. Silence again. Mom, I have to go. We'll talk later. Jessica, wait. But the line was dead. I dropped the receiver and collapsed in my hallway. Not physically, though my knees were weak, but emotionally. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. But then, in that moment of absolute despair, I heard a voice. It was Robert's voice, as clear as if he were standing next to me. Margaret, my love, you're stronger than you think. You've always been stronger than you think. I looked up and saw his photo on the hall table. That smile I knew so well, the smile that had given me strength in the most difficult times. What should I do, Robert? I whispered. But I already knew the answer. Robert hadn't raised me to be intimidated by anyone, not even my own daughter. I stood up, went to the phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Law Offices of Peterson and Associates, good afternoon. Good afternoon, this is Margaret Thompson. I'd like an appointment with Mr. Peterson. It's urgent. What is this regarding, Mrs. Thompson? I took a deep breath. It's about defending my home. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Attorney Peterson, a man around 50 who had drawn up Robert's will and had known the family for years. Mrs. Thompson, he said after a thorough consultation, your rights are clear. As long as you're of sound mind, and I have no doubt about that, nobody can force you to sell your house or move to a nursing home. Not even your daughter. But they're threatening guardianship proceedings. That would be very difficult to establish. They would need medical evaluations proving that you're no longer competent. And honestly, Mrs. Thompson, after our conversation today, no serious doctor would provide such an evaluation. For the first time in days, I smiled. What should I do now? Fight, Mrs. Thompson. If you want, I'll help you. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Jessica's voice sounded different, colder, more determined. Mom, Michael and I are coming over tomorrow. We need to settle this once and for all. Jessica, we'll be there at 2 o'clock. Please have your decision ready. On Saturday morning, I cleaned the entire house. I didn't know why, it was already spotless, but I needed something to keep my hands and mind busy. I straightened photos, rearranged the flowers in the vase that Robert had given me for our last anniversary. At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Jessica and Michael, but this time they weren't alone. A middle-aged stranger stood next to them. Mom, Jessica said, this is Dr. Harrison. He's a psychiatrist. My heart sank. A psychiatrist. Michael pushed forward. Margaret, we're concerned about your behavior lately. Dr. Harrison is here to provide a professional assessment. An assessment of what? Of your mental health, Dr. Harrison said with professional friendliness. Don't worry, it's just an informal conversation. I felt cornered, but I remembered Attorney Peterson's words, you're of sound mind. Don't be afraid to show it. Come in, I said with a firm voice. In the living room, Dr. Harrison sat across from me while Michael and Jessica sat stiffly on the couch. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Harrison began, your family is concerned. Can you tell me how you've been feeling lately? How I've been feeling? I looked him directly in the eyes. Betrayed. Abandoned. Threatened by the people I love most. Dr. Harrison made a note. You feel threatened? Wouldn't you feel threatened if your own family wanted to drive you from your home? Mom, Jessica interrupted, nobody wants to drive you away. We just want what's best for you. I turned to my daughter. Jessica, do you remember when you were 16 and desperately wanted to move to New York to become an actress? Mom, what does that have to do with anything? I thought it was a mistake. Dad did too. But do you know what we said? Jessica remained silent. We said, it's your life, Jessica. You have to make your own decisions, even if we don't understand them. Do you remember? Jessica's eyes filled with tears. That's different. No, it's not. It's exactly the same. You were 16 and wanted to live your life. I'm 78 and want to live my life. The only difference is that I have more life experience than you did then. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. Mrs. Thompson, do you live alone in this large house? Yes. Are you sometimes afraid? Sometimes. But I was also afraid when I was pregnant for the first time. I was afraid when Robert got his cancer diagnosis. Fear is part of life. But at your age, the risks are higher. I smiled. Dr. Harrison, may I ask how old you are? I'm 52. Have you ever watched someone you love die? Yes. Then you know that life is precious precisely because it's finite. Every day I spend in this house, among the memories of my life with Robert, is a gift. Why should I give that up to sit in a sterile room waiting for death to come? Michael interjected. Margaret, you're romanticizing this. What if you have a medical emergency? Then I'll call an ambulance. Just like anyone else would. But what if you're unconscious? Michael, my voice became sharper, I could also be hit by a bus. Should I stop crossing the street? Dr. Harrison asked more questions, about my daily routines, my finances, my social contacts. With each answer, it became clearer that I was not only of sound mind but also living a thoughtful, fulfilling life. After an hour, Dr. Harrison stood up. I need to speak with you, he said to Michael and Jessica. They went into the hallway. I could hear their muffled voices, but not the words. After 10 minutes, they returned. Dr. Harrison addressed me. Mrs. Thompson, I see no reason for concern regarding your mental health. You're clearly of sound mind, well-oriented, and making reasonable decisions for your life. Michael's face turned red. You can't be serious. Yes, I am. Mrs. Thompson doesn't need psychiatric care or guardianship. After Dr. Harrison left, the three of us remained alone. The tension in the room was palpable. Mom, Jessica said finally, her voice shaky, you don't understand. Michael. No. My voice echoed through the house. I understand very well. Michael wants you to move to Seattle, and he doesn't want me to be a burden. He wants to sell my house because it's worth money. And you, Jessica, my own daughter, are letting him. That's not fair. Jessica screamed back. I'm worried about you. No, Jessica. You're worried about your conscience. You know what you're doing is wrong, but you're doing it anyway because it's easier than standing up to Michael. Michael stood up, his face distorted with anger. Listen, Margaret. Jessica and I are moving to Seattle. Period. We can't constantly drive here to check on you. If you want to be stubborn, then be stubborn. But don't expect us to help you when something happens. Michael. Jessica stared at her husband in horror. No, Jessica. I've had enough. Your mother is stubborn and selfish. She only thinks about herself. I stood up slowly. Despite my small stature, I seemed to grow larger in that moment. Michael, I said with a calm that was more frightening than any scream, you just turned my daughter against me in my own house. You tried to have me declared incompetent. You threatened to abandon me if I don't do what you want. I walked toward him until I stood directly in front of him. But you know what? You misunderstood one thing. I'm not Jessica. I'm a 78-year-old woman who survived the Great Depression, who maintained a 52-year marriage, who raised a child and cared for a man until his death. You can't intimidate me. Michael stepped back. And now, I said with icy calm, leave my house. And don't come back until you've learned what respect means. Mom. Jessica began. Jessica, I turned to my daughter, you have to choose. Either you stand by your family, by me, the woman who gave birth to you and raised you, or you stand by a man who tried to humiliate your mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica looked back and forth between her mother and her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks. Finally, she said with a broken voice, Mom, we have to go. And they left. I remained alone in my house, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel defeated. I had fought for myself, and won. 3 weeks passed in complete silence. No calls, no visits, no messages. I knew that Jessica and Michael had already moved to Seattle, but it still hurt that my daughter hadn't even said goodbye. The neighbors, however, became my new family. Grace Johnson came over for coffee every morning. Mr. Williams from the bookstore brought me new books every week. The young Miller family across the street offered to do my shopping when the weather was bad. You see, Attorney Peterson said when we met for a follow-up, you're far from alone or helpless. I nodded. I'm beginning to understand that family doesn't just mean blood relation. On a cold December morning, the phone rang. My heart leaped when I heard Jessica's voice. Mom. Jessica. My voice was neutral, neither cold nor warm. Mom, I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I had to call you. The silence stretched between us like an abyss. I waited. I had learned that sometimes silence is more powerful than words. Mom, I'm pregnant. My heart jumped. Pregnant? 12 weeks. It's a girl. Jessica's voice broke. And all I can think is, what kind of mother am I if I treated my own mother this way? I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, my hand on my chest. A granddaughter. Robert would have been so happy. Jessica, I said gently, tell me what's going on inside you. Michael and I, we fight constantly. He doesn't understand why I'm so upset. He says we did the right thing, we acted sensibly. But Mom. Jessica was crying openly now. I can't sleep at night. I see you in that big house, all alone, and I know I abandoned you. Jessica. No, let me talk. Please. I have to tell you this. Jessica took a deep breath. Do you remember the day Dad died? Of course. You were so strong. You held his hand, sang to him, until his very last breath. And I thought then, that's how I want to be loved someday. Unconditionally. Without ifs or buts. I felt my own eyes filling with tears. But then, Jessica continued, I heard Michael's voice in my head. All his reasonable arguments. All his concerns about money and practicality and responsibility. And I forgot that love isn't practical. Love is staying, even when it gets hard. Jessica, my child. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but, could you forgive me? Could you give me a second chance? I closed my eyes and saw Robert in front of me, smiling. My love for Jessica had never disappeared, it had just been buried under layers of pain and disappointment. Jessica, you're my daughter. I love you no matter what happens. But, I need time. And I need to know that something has really changed. What do you mean? Michael treated me disrespectfully. He tried to drive me from my own home. If you want a relationship with me, he needs to understand that wasn't acceptable. Jessica was silent for a long time. He has trouble admitting mistakes. That's his problem, Jessica. Not mine. 2 weeks later, Jessica stood at my front door. Alone. She had visibly grown with the pregnancy, and her face had the softness that pregnancy sometimes brings. But there was also something new in her eyes, a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. May I come in, Mom? We sat in the kitchen, where so many important conversations of our family had taken place. Jessica told me about Seattle, about the new apartment, about Michael's job. But she also told me about her loneliness, her guilt, her nighttime conversations with the baby in her womb about the grandmother she might never know. Michael wants me to ask you to visit us, Jessica said finally. Does he want that? Or do you want that? Jessica smiled for the first time since her arrival. I want that. Very much. But, he has to face you personally. He has to apologize. And is he ready for that? I told him he has no choice. That our marriage depends on it. I looked at my daughter with new eyes. You've become stronger. I had to. For my baby. She deserves a mother who fights for what's right. 4 days later, all 3 of us traveled to Seattle. It was my first visit to the Pacific Northwest, and despite the circumstances, I was excited. The train journey gave me time to think about everything that had happened and what might come. Michael was waiting for us at the station. He looked tired, older somehow. When he saw me, he stopped for a moment before approaching. Margaret, he said stiffly, thank you for coming. I just nodded. The apartment in Seattle was modern and expensive, but it felt cold. No photos, no personal items that told of a life lived. It looked like a hotel room. At dinner, there was initially tense silence. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. Margaret, it's hard for me to say this, but I made a mistake. I waited. I thought I was doing the best thing for everyone. I thought efficiency and reason were more important than other things. Then what, Michael? He looked at Jessica, who gave him an encouraging look. Then feelings. Then memories. Then your right to live your own life. And now? Michael sighed deeply. Now I understand that I tried to destroy your family because I thought it would make my life easier. That was selfish and wrong. It wasn't the most eloquent apology, but I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before, genuine remorse. Michael, I said gently, I forgive you. But I don't forget. If you try to come between Jessica and me again, our relationship is over for good. He nodded seriously. Understood. The next 3 days we spent really getting to know each other. Michael told me about his own childhood, about a father who had seen emotions as weakness. I told him about Robert, about our marriage, about the dreams we had realized together. On the last evening, we all sat on the balcony of the Seattle apartment, looking out over the city lights. Mom, Jessica said, placing her hand on her belly, how would it be if the little one calls you Grandma? Grandma. I smiled. I'd like that. And maybe, Michael added, we could come to Salem more often. So the baby knows her home too. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of pain and fear I'd been carrying for months. I would like that very much, I said. 6 months later, little Emma was born. Jessica and Michael came to Salem with her, and I held my granddaughter for the first time in my arms, in the same living room where I had once held Jessica as a baby. Welcome home, little Emma, I whispered, while the baby looked at me with big, curious eyes. Michael stood in the doorway, watching the scene. You were right, Margaret, he said quietly. About what? A home isn't just a house. It's the place where love lives. I looked up and saw Jessica take Michael's hand. Our little family had found its way back to each other, not perfect, not without scars, but more genuine and stronger than before. Outside, the church bells of Salem were ringing, as they had for over a century. And in that little Victorian house sat a grandmother with her granddaughter in her arms, knowing that some battles are worth fighting. Sometimes the strongest love isn't the one that gives in, but the one that stands firm. Sometimes we have to learn to say no in order to say yes to what really matters. And sometimes, when we have the courage to fight for ourselves, we discover that we're not just saving our own lives, but also the relationships that mean the most to us. I was 78 years old when I learned that it's never too late to fight for your happiness. And in my little house in Salem, surrounded by memories and hopes, by old loves and new beginnings, I lived the life I had chosen for myself, with dignity, with strength, and with the unshakable certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. If you liked this story, leave your opinion in the comments and of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.